Hey, this is Vu, and this is going to be questions and answers number 6. I'm going to talk about getting aggressive early round at apartments on Inferno, trying to find entries. I'm going to be talking about how to play a little bit more aggressive if you're naturally a passive player, how to solo pug on ESCA, I have some tips for that, and the final one is fairly simple, and it's just where should you be really looking when you're trying to move around the map. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to advertise a YouTube channel that I found and I've been watching quite a bit recently. This is not a paid advertisement, but there's a YouTuber called Elma Putty who puts out videos on how certain pro players or teams play certain areas, aggressions they do, with examples in the game, as well as a little bit of chat about why he thinks those things are done. I think it's definitely worth checking out. He's only got 1,000 subscribers, so I thought I'd give him a quick shout out here and maybe put you guys in the right direction if you're trying to kind of refine your play a little bit. So anyways, the first question I'll answer here is where should I be aiming or where should I be looking when I'm moving around the map. He thinks that maybe he should be staring at his crosshair, but actually what you want to be doing is you want to be staring at where your crosshair is going. This is something that you kind of learn if you've learned driving. In certain driving schools, they talk about if you want to move somewhere, if you want to drive somewhere around a corner, around a bend or something, you should be looking off in the distance and you will naturally move in that direction. And the same can kind of be said to be true about aiming in general. If you look at where your opponent is, you see them, you should focus on them, and you can land some sort of flick more often than if you look at your crosshair. It just doesn't make any sense to try and look at your crosshair and thereby react out of your peripheral vision instead of reacting a little bit more quickly and probably having better aim in general by looking where you're trying to move your crosshair to and then just focusing on that. Second question is going to be getting aggressive at apartments here. With an op specifically, I believe, is the best way to do this. You can do it with a rifle, but I think rifling requires kind of a duo setup. For example, you can play a player kind of looking towards this direction and a player over in this direction together. However, again, that's going to be with 2 players, so you need to kind of have a teammate working for that. However, especially working with a rifle and an op can be one of the best ways to do it. So for example, you can have kind of what G2 does oftentimes is they'll often have a rifler sitting right here and an opper sitting here. So the opper will be peeking this angle, the rifler will be holding this angle, and if he comes out left, it's going to be a free kill. If he comes out right, typically what they're doing is they're trying to clear this angle. They're not peeking narrow and clearing this angle. So usually it'll be a pretty easy kill for the rifler, or at least a trade in worst case scenarios. So this is a pretty solid way to do it, and this can often be combined with a player sitting back here. It's a very risky way to try and find an entry in apartments, but I think it's a very solid one. So just peek towards here, especially with an op. You can do it with a rifle, however, of course, there's every chance that you get out-reacted or they peek out on you perfectly and just instant kill you. So this is a pretty solid angle with an op. You can find an entry. And you can also do the aggressive kind of risky push down here. This used to be a much safer push and a much, kind of more comfortable push as these angles used to be lined up. However, still, because it's such a weird angle and because it's fairly risky, I found that almost nobody is ever expecting it, and so they very rarely come around the corners correctly trying to clear this, especially from up close. So I think those are probably the best bets to try and get aggressive in apartments. You can also do some weird things. For example, one of the favorite ways of mine that I used to play in apartments in old Inferno, and it still works to a certain extent on new Inferno here, is this angle here. What happens is oftentimes players will clear out this angle, and there's a reason I don't play this angle back here because players often quick peek it and pre-fire it, and then they'll clear out this angle. And oftentimes if they clear out this angle, they're going to be exposed to you, or if they're clearing out towards the headshot angle, they will also be exposed to you if you're playing this angle correctly. So this can be another odd off angle that people aren't expecting, and you can get some pretty easy kills with this as well. Other than that, apartments has kind of been changed to make it very hard to fluidly get picks and fall off in apartments, so I would recommend kind of staying away from it to a certain extent and going elsewhere. Next up, players asking, I play super laid back in support. Any tips on how to adapt to a more aggressive playstyle? Well, one thing you need to recognize here is how aggressive or how passive you are is often based on just you yourself. Of course, you can play more aggressively for pugs if you want to, or you can play more passively, some players, but typically all you're doing is you're taking an aggressive or a passive player and chaining them up a little bit. So I can give you some tips to play aggressive a little bit more. However, you should recognize that you're probably always going to be a little bit more of a passive player. That's probably how you're going to be the entire time you play CS. And perhaps you should try and focus on improving your ability to win by playing a little bit more passively instead of focusing on going overly aggressive. Now, this is true to a certain extent in my eyes, because of course you're going to be a more passive player, you know, if you're a more passive person, if that's just what you prefer, that's how you're comfortable, but you can still go for some aggressive plays when you need to, and you should be comfortable doing that as much as possible. So that's the type of thing you can definitely practice. So one of the things you can do is you can try and get entry frag routes down. Now I do have a video on this specifically, and I don't have any information on new Inferno banana here because this is kind of an odd place to take. However, you can try and get an entry frag route down on this spot as well, and you can get one down on every map. So for example, if you're trying to play Inferno here, you might think that you want to molly towards car, and then afterwards you want to pop flash high so that they can't peek out on you. Then you can push up, and you might want to clear the corner by clearing like this. Then you might want to have a teammate also molly sandbags while you pop flash the corner in case they're popping out. Then you've got full top banana control, and maybe you're comfortable peeking this if you're an opper. And there you go. That's an entry frag route you can do on Inferno's banana. Now, of course, this isn't the best entry frag route ever because you don't actually get control of a bomb site. You don't actually get full control of very much at all. However, the point of these entry frag routes that I have is you get control of something where you're very likely to probably encounter opponents, and you're putting yourself in the situation where you have an advantage whenever possible. And so that means on cache, you can actually have an entry frag route that works your way all the way into sight fairly safely. However, on a map like Inferno, which has a lot more weird angles, a lot more advantageous CT positioning, it can be a lot harder, and thereby you can go for somewhere like banana control, or maybe you can get an entry frag route towards apartments, and you can think of things that work for you, hopefully that can get you high impact kills and put you in positions where if you don't find any kills, you have some control of the map. So I'd recommend looking at my entry frag routes video, maybe adapting them if you don't like them or if you're not comfortable with them, and try and force yourself to play those very often so when you need to, you can go aggressive. Now, the final question I'm going to be talking about here is going to be any tips on solo pugging on ESEA. I'm trying to improve as a player. And the one thing I want to mention here is a little bit about tilting. You're going to find that on ESEA, you're very oftentimes going to have teammates or opponents that trash talk a lot. Especially some of these higher ranked players get a pretty big ego, and they like to think that they're very good at the game, and trash talk any little play or any little mistake that you're making. And I can give some advice on that, in that you should just try and focus on your own gameplay as much as possible. You're also probably going to get in situations where you feel like there's no way you can carry your team, things like that, and you should recognize that sometimes you're put into games where you simply can't win, and all you can do is try and improve yourself as a player while in those games. So forget about your teammates, which are, ESEA is typically a very toxic place to play pugs. People, not the client itself, but a lot of their user base, because they're competitive players, tend to be kind of ragey. You can try and avoid that just by, trying to ignore them as much as possible, play your gameplay, and whether you're winning or losing, just try and improve something every game. And of course, this is true for ESEA, this is true for matchmaking as well. Every game, even if you're losing, even if your teammates all have 0 kills, you can do your own thing, especially if you have, as I mentioned earlier in this video, an entry frag route that you can do alone. So for example, if I can entry on a B on cache every round, I can go there solo, I can work that alone. It doesn't matter if my teammates are bad, it doesn't matter if my teammates are having terrible games, or they're raging, or they're AFK, or whatever, because I can do my own thing, I can work on what I'm trying to work on, and I can go from there. So That's really all I have to say about that. The only other thing I would mention is that it's going to take a little bit to adapt to ESEA, as ESEA is a little bit more aggressive, I've found, than matchmaking. People go for a lot more anti-eco frags to pad their stats, and also just in general, players have better aim and thereby play a little bit more aggressive. So you should get used to that, get comfortable with the fact that they're going to be more aggressive and play around that. But other than that, thanks for watching, and I hope this helped.